watching Business Edge. And before we bring you international business stories, let's just run through our discussion that has to do with taxing the digital economy, because it's very important for Africa, as it were. And as we know it, African countries often struggle to keep pace with the advancement in technology and the resulting digital business models, which leads to difficulties in capturing taxable income and improving the overall tax system. The lack of adequate mechanisms to tax digital transactions and the absence of a level playing field for local and international companies further compound the challenges. However, tax administrators in Africa have started to study and internalize international tax reforms like multilateral tax agreements aimed at improving tax systems on the continent. Participation in setting global tax standards is also important. Transparency and efforts at combating tax evasion and profit shifting are also part of what they are gunning for. So this morning, we are on the segment Taxing Africa, and it is powered by the West African Tax Administration Forum. So joining me this morning is Mr. Mathew Gbunjobola, and is the Coordinating Director, Compliance Support Group, Federal Inland Revenue Service, Nigeria. Thank you, Mr. Mathew, for joining us. Hello, Mr. Mathew, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you very much.
All right, so let's talk about the main distinctions in terms of the challenges that has to do with a digital economy in Africa's tax systems. What would you say are the major impediments to that?
I think the number one impediment is the law, and that is the law around what is called tax nexus. And that has to do with the physical presence of the businesses in the country, where an entity does not have physical presence in a jurisdiction. It is said not to have tax nexus, and therefore cannot be taxed under the current taxing regime in the law. And so that's the major problem. The second challenge to that has to do with the capacity of tax systems in Africa to cope with businesses that are not physically present. So tracing, contacting, and being able to bring such businesses to taxation is a very big challenge for tax authorities, not only in Africa, but in most of developing countries of the world. I think the last bit of it that might be a challenge is has to do with international tax treaties, which allocate taxing rights to residents where the countries where these businesses have their residence. So these are the three major impediments and challenges that African countries and developing countries generally have when it comes to taxation of digitalized economy. Thank you.
Then for African countries that have tax nexus and have embraced international tax reforms and implemented it or incorporated it into their tax systems, what has been the benefit so far to these African countries, and what roles did the multilateral bodies play in ensuring that Africa is able to benefit from its tax system?
I think that we have to separate the issues first into their components. Number one, what each individual countries in Africa can do or has been able to do. I think we have three groups of African countries in this regard. One, we have the group that has introduced what we call the digital services tax, like in Kenya. We have the group like Nigeria that has introduced a significant economic presence rule for the purposes of establishing nexus. And then there's the third group that has not done anything at all. Those are the three groups that we have. Now, the question now is how does the current multilateral discussions, how do they add to this? What we have currently is the discussions at the G20 inclusive framework in respect of taxation of digitalized economy, which is generally addressed as Pillar 1. And what that has done is to propose a multilateral approach, which will enable market jurisdictions to be able to tax these businesses by allocating some measure of the profit to the market jurisdiction. But again, the discussions are still progressing, even though it's coming to a gradual end, hopefully by the end of next month. But again, not all countries are participating. And even of those participating, not everyone is in agreement with what we have currently. So whether it has played any role or not for now, it is yet to be seen until when the rules are fully agreed and developed, and then we see how many countries will be willing to adopt them.
All right, they're talking about facilitating understanding and seeing how to bring as many African countries on board. The mechanisms as regards Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 of the globe, would you say that is a bit cumbersome, or would you say it profiles the right solutions to the challenges faced by tax administrations and administrators in Africa?
First of all, we need to understand that, yes, we have two pillars, but the two pillars actually represent four different streams. There is the work stream for digitalized economy, which is the amount A in itself. There is the amount B, which is essentially transfer pricing issues around the market and distribution activities. And then the pillar 2 has to do with the GLOBE, which is the global minimum tax. And then what we call the subject to tax rule, which is a treaty-based rule. So we have four work streams actually in respect of the two pillar solution. But the one that is more relevant to digitalized economy is the amount A, which, like I said, not all the countries of the world and of Africa are participating. Nigeria is participating, of course, and not all the countries that are participating have joined or have agreed with the rules. Nigeria has its own reservation on some of the rules. But then when you look at the totality of the rules, amount A rules are very, very complex, extremely complex. I can say that. And then the question is, what can be done to bring this, to simplify it? It's difficult to simplify in truth. And that is because there are too many interests that are accommodated in the rules, and because of that, the rules are necessarily complex. The other rules may not be as complicated. Amount B is a simplification of transfer pricing rules, so it's not very complex. The GLOBE rule is fairly complex, but it's manageable, it can be operated. And then the subject to tax rule is also not as complex. I think the most complex of them is the amount A, and that is because it is a product of intense negotiation of contending interests of different jurisdictions.
So finally, before I let Mathew go, Mathew, I'd just like to understand, aside the issues of complexities and maybe workabilities of either Pillar 1 or Pillar 2, because you said that the mechanism could be a bit cumbersome, some critics have actually advocated for a lesser threshold to allow more corporations to come on board and be in scope. Do you think that is a viable way to bring about more participation of these African countries?
It may help because the current rule has been developed has probably less than 100 MNEs that are going to be in scope. And the most popular companies that are participating or carrying on businesses through the digital channels are very many. And the most popular of them are not even in scope. And so it's one of the reasons why some countries are not willing to participate, because they see that the current rules for amount A is rather narrow, and there's so many businesses within the African space that are not in scope. And the bit of it is once a country signed up to amount A, it cannot bring these other companies to taxation on its own. I think if the scope is relaxed such that more of the digital companies are able to come in under Amount A, it might become encouraging for countries that have stayed away to consider joining.
All right, thank you so much, Mathew, for giving us your time to talk to us about taxation. We really appreciate you coming around.